If we focus on Poland and try to discuss the situation of women during the socialism in Poland, we again need to look at both the so-called we can look at what we could call ideologies and realities. So on the one hand, we can look at how the regime presented the emancipatory policies or emancipation of women and how it actually worked out in practice. So, of course, emancipation of women and equality for women and men was presented as a very important element of the new socialist regime established in 1945. But in practice, if we look how it worked, in fact, the policies which were established by the socialist state were having kind of contradictory results, because in a way this strengthened the essentialist perception of gender roles in socialist Poland, and also it meant emasculation of men, because of the establishment of the socialist regime, men were deprived, were excluded from real power. It followed the massive entry of women to the labor market meant dramatic changes in family structures, and also this also meant that men were no longer considered as primary breadwinners. So the position of a breadwinner, which was so far considered as the most important and central for the male identity, was no longer in place, because women were encouraged to enter the labor market, were even forced to enter the labor market, which means that it was very much destabilizing for the position of men. And of course, men were also excluded from the political power, because this was held in the hands of the party members only, or the party, the kind of persons holding the top positions. So in a way, equal participation or emancipation of women in during socialist Poland meant in practice the entry of women to the labor market, but it also meant access to education. So even if we look at the kind of positive sides, lots of women were entering labor market, and in comparison to various Western European countries at that time, Polish women were given much more rights, social rights, and they were much more visible and present at the labor market than the women in the Western European societies. They also had much better access to education, especially if we compare the data from before the war, the Second World War, and after. Of course, what was happening after the war, there was a massive entry of women to the both labor market and education. So we can say that this was something which could be considered as very positive. However, in practice, again, the picture wasn't that nice, because what women experienced entering the labor market was a double or triple burden, meaning that they were encouraged very much to become the socialist workers, to be present in the labor market, to be a worker or political activist, but nothing was challenged and nothing was changed in the private sphere, which meant that women were both expected to work full-time and still be full-time careers at home in the private sphere. So most of women during socialism experience what is called double or triple burden, which means that, or double shift, that they were expected to be both at work and to be responsible for raising children and caring and all the labor at home. So this transformation, the entry of women to the labor market didn't challenge at all the involvement of men in domestic issues. So this private sphere, this kind of arrangement between men and women in private sphere wasn't challenged at all. Again, if we look at the participation in public and political sphere at the level of declarations, the Socialist Party was stressing very much that women need to be present, need to be involved, they should be politically active, they should be active in various, of course, state-led organizations. However, again, in practice, the role of women in political and party structures were rather ornamental, which means that women were there to make the numbers, to make the kind of quota, but in practice they didn't have any real power. So in fact we can say, despite the declarations that that women need to be present and involved in the public sphere and political sphere, in fact they were as powerless as men during the socialist times. Another dimension of the emancipatory policies of socialist regime was related to the reproductive rights, because already in the 50s the state introduced the legal abortion. Scholars, commentators stressed that this was part of the war with the Church, with the Roman Catholic Church, the dominant religious denomination in Poland. So allowing women to have free and easy access to the abortion was part of the kind of fight, or stressing the bigger, the more important role of the state vis-a-vis the Church. So, but in practice, again, abortion was widespread and usually used as a contraceptive method, especially in the situation of lack of sexual education and limited access to other means of contraception. So in a way, abortion was available freely and for free, but however, it was often treated as the last resort, as the only way of as the only mean of regulating as exercising the reproductive rights of women. Summarizing what was happening in socialist times, during socialist time in Poland, it was in fact reinforcement of traditional patriarchy. Just because the state was perceived as something imposed from outside, of course imposed by the Soviet Union, and society was defined in opposition to this alien state. In that context, traditional gender roles or traditional gender identity was perceived as a cultural resource for resistance. So, to put it in other words, the emancipatory project of the socialist state was seen as imposed by the Soviet Union, and therefore as something which is alien, which is kind of established from outside, and the use of traditional gender identity. Traditional gender identity was used as a way of resisting this imposed transformation of gender role. Of course, again, the Roman Catholic Church played a very important role here, because it was kind of unified with the society against this foreign state. So of course the Roman Catholic Church was also very much strengthening the traditional gender identities, and in fact, in the result, the emancipatory project of the socialist state was in fact causing or initiating the resistance and the reinforcement of the traditional gender identities. However, we also need to stress that despite the problems with the results of the emancipatory policies of the socialist Poland, we also need to remember that certain positive developments were happening in that period for women as well. Some of the recent scholars are stressing that what was happening in the 50s and 60s was also the emergence of the new models and new identities available for women, kind of aside from the dominant model of the Polish mother patriot. Therefore, women were expected, it was socially accepted for women to be both a worker, an activist, or so-called modern girl, being independent, caring about the beauty and these sort of things. So of course, we need to remember that this very kind of black and white picture of the socialist attempt to emancipate women on the one hand, and the women's resistance to that because of the resistance to the socialist state in more general terms. There are, of course, many other developments in between, and they are now becoming more and more kind of realized. Because for long, I think the scholars of gender studies, of feminist scholars, were kind of resisting any positives related to the socialist period. But now, more and more scholarship is trying to stress that there were some positives, some positive developments happening as well in that time for women.